Today I want to give you very practical steps on what it looks like to simplify and declutter your entire life, every aspect of your life, so that you can also figure out what is actually meaningful to you and what isn't, and then go and start to live that out. At the end, I do want to give you a few book recommendations that have really helped me in this process, so make sure you hang around for those. I think a lot of us would agree that our lives have just become overly busy, overly complicated, and worst of all, that we just live in a state of constant distraction. And I think that this leads a lot of us to live our lives in a way that isn't genuine or authentic to who we are. When I got off social media several years ago, I just didn't want to continue to feel like my life didn't measure up. And I was really sick of trying to live my life by society's standards because they were not my standards. I just really wanted to start living a life that was authentic and genuine to who I was. And this entire process is rooted in simplifying our lives so that we can carve out what is meaningful to us and what isn't. Because I think that what's meaningful to us can get blurred when we are on social media and when we're constantly being told what should hold value in our lives. Simplicity means different things to different people, and of course there are different levels of simplicity, the same way that there are different levels of minimalism. Simplifying our lives is easiest when it's done in stages. It can be wildly overwhelming to try to simplify your entire life all at once, and often it will lead to burnout, you give up, and then you just revert to your old ways. But before we actually get to the act of simplifying, we need to keep one question in mind as we go through this process. And that question is, what does a simple life look like to me? For me, it looked like working less hours so that I could be with my children more. It looked like traveling. It looked like having time to help serve in my church. And most of all, and maybe the most simple of all, I just wanted time to be, to sit in this chair, my favorite chair, and just do nothing and not feel rushed in not doing nothing. I didn't want my days to be jam-packed from the time I woke up until the time I went to bed, just nonstop on the go, because for me, living that way was just exhausting. And even though my life was filled with all of these commitments and things and these busy schedules, it ultimately just wasn't fulfilling and really didn't hold any kind of deep meaning for me. So ask yourself, what does a simple life look like to you? And then I want you to keep that in mind as we move through simplifying all the major areas of our lives. So first, and probably the most unsurprisingly, is our homes. Because we're in our homes more than really we are anywhere else, it makes sense to simplify our houses first. And I found that when my house was simplified and decluttered, it actually made it easier to simplify and declutter the other areas of my life. Now, I'm the person that when I commit to doing something, it is gonna get done at lightning speed. So when I went through this process, this was actually like my first step into minimalism several years ago. We were in a rental house, and I decided that I was going to simplify my house, get rid of everything that we didn't need, and I went full throttle, and I did this in less than a week, which for a lot of people, and understandably so, is just way too overwhelming, and I totally get that. So if that's you, if that seems like too much, then start small. So instead of tackling an entire room, especially in places that can collect clutter like the garage and the kitchen and bathrooms, just start with one drawer, or start with one shelf, or start with one corner. And I think you'll find that tackling these small areas first and getting them done will motivate you to continue to tackle the bigger areas as you go. And it can also be super helpful when you're going through the larger spaces that can often feel overwhelming to set a timer. This is something that A lot of decluttering people talk about, again, I never used it because I just went full throttle, but it can be really helpful to set a timer for 20 or 30 minutes and just give yourself 20 or 30 minutes to work through that space, and then you're done. And then you just take a break for however long you need. It's a really good way to prevent yourself from becoming overwhelmed and from burning out during this process. Another thing that I found really helpful when I was decluttering my own home was that I made piles. You can do this with trash bags or with bins, but have a bag or a bin or whatever you want for stuff you're gonna keep, stuff you're gonna donate, and stuff that really just has to be trashed, unfortunately. And bring them with you as you go. That way, as you're decluttering, it makes that process a lot easier and a lot more streamlined to put things in these bins or bags or whatever it is as you go. I would also encourage you to really don't overanalyze it, but just ask yourself, do I love this thing? And my barometer for loving something is, if it's not 100% heck yes, it's a no. So that made it very easy for me to decide things that I was gonna keep and things that I was not going to keep. A second follow-up question that's really, really helpful is ask yourself, if I didn't own this thing right now, but I saw it in a store, would I want to buy it? Because often the answer is no. It sort of gives your brain the ability to be like, okay, we don't need that, and then you put that in the donation pile. That's a great question, and it worked really, really well for me as I moved through my own house. And then, of course, we also wanna ask, does this add any kind of practical value to your life? And then the last thing I wanna touch on here is guilt. I think, and I know that this is especially true for me, when I would think about decluttering things that people had made for me or had given to me, people that I really cared about, I felt really guilty about getting rid of them. Because, you know, those people, they thought of me, it was so nice of them. But I also am of the opinion that when you are gifted something and it's given to you, once it is given to you, it is now yours to do with as you see fit. I mean, I know for me, if somebody said, I really love that thing that you gave me, but I just don't find myself using it, are you okay with me getting rid of it or donating it? Not that that question would have to be asked. If somebody did ask me that, if something that I gave you is not adding value to your life, get rid of it. I will not have any hard feelings. And so I think that we tend to guilt ourselves into keeping things that we don't need and don't actually want. And I would encourage you to remember that once an item is given to you, it is now yours to do with as you see fit, and do not let that burden you. If you're not using it, but you think that it's something that other people may find value in using or in having, then get rid of it, because it's better for it to be in a home where instead of collecting dust and causing you to feel guilt every time you see it, it can be loved and used by somebody else. If you would like me to make a video dedicated to decluttering your house and how I went through that process myself, I would love to make that for you guys. If you would find that helpful, please let me know down in the comments and I'll get started on that. If you also are interested in how I decluttered my wardrobe, I will leave that linked down below as well. So next we are going to declutter our schedules. And this is where we can get the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to carving out a meaningful life, because this is where we are going to get back our time. So when I looked at decluttering my own schedule, I made a list, like a physical list on paper, which I encourage you to do as well because it's helpful to have a visual of all the commitments that I had. These included work, church, extracurricular activities that my boys were in, watching my nieces, being a den leader in my boys' Boy Scout group, and of course the insane amount of housework that I required of myself. So when I thought about what I wanted my simple life to look like, the only things that made the cut were church, work, although a lot less work, and any extracurriculars that my kids wanted to do. So ultimately that meant that I let go of the commitment of watching my nieces, my role that I played in the Boy Scouts. My boys didn't even want to continue Boy Scouts, so that was pretty easy. And I found a way to keep my house clean without the incessant and nonstop tidying and cleaning. And if you're interested in what habits I use to keep my house clean and tidy without always cleaning and tidying, I'll make sure to leave that linked down in the description below. But reducing my commitments allowed me so much more time in my day to pursue things that were deeply meaningful to me, like volunteering more in my church, spending more time with my kids, and starting this YouTube channel. And I noticed that I just don't feel rushed anymore. And not feeling rushed means that I can read my Bible without feeling like I'm on some sort of time crunch. I can spend more time outside with my kids, and I have a lot more time to just rest. Like the other day, I read an entire book in one day and didn't feel rushed in the slightest. And that's the kind of time that I love to have. Whereas before, I was constantly on the go, I was constantly rushing around, we always had somewhere to be, and even when I was home, in a space where I should have been able to rest and relax, when I sat down, I went from being physically all over the place to sitting down and being physically overstimulated by my phone. So that is another area that I have greatly simplified and decluttered, is reducing my screen time, which I could do a whole video on that in and of itself. But between feeling like I was either physically on the go or mentally on the go, I was just exhausted all the time. So simplifying this area of your life is where you're gonna get the most fruit, the most bang for your buck, the most return on your investment. Time is a luxury and we have to treat it that way. The next area that I simplified were our finances, and this looked like getting out of debt, going through our subscriptions and canceling the ones that we weren't using, or even worse, didn't even know that we had, making a budget and sticking to it, only using one checking account instead of having two. We used to have one for bills and then one for everything else, and we just consolidated it, and only using one credit card. So now instead of juggling multiple credit cards depending on which card gave you a reward for whatever that month, it's all very confusing. I just use the Capital One Venture card, which gives me the biggest bang for my buck in terms of flight points, which when I travel, I do not want to pay for a flight, and that has worked out beautifully. Otherwise, our other credit cards stay locked up in a lockbox. We don't use them at all. Simplifying my finances helped me to realize that I actually don't want to buy stuff, and I really don't want to spend my money on things that just aren't meaningful to me. Things like getting my nails done, things like highlighting my hair, things like the endless amount of home decor that I used to buy. None of that stuff matters to me as much as having money to do things that make memories with my family. So next up, we're gonna be simplifying and decluttering the harder areas of our lives, I think. First up, we're gonna look at our relationships. I think it's a common misconception that the more friends we have, the better our life will be. But I've actually found the opposite of that to be true, because I felt like the more friends I had, the more time I had to spend pouring into each of those friendships. And you only have so much time and emotional energy to do that. And so I found that inevitably my friendships, when I had a lot of them, were just very shallow, very skin deep, and were not meaningful. And so I just sort of quietly let those relationships die off on their own naturally. But I found that now I can pour my time and my emotional energy into the few friends that I have chosen to keep around, the ones that bring true value and meaning to my life. So I would encourage you to consider this as well. I deeply believe that this is an area of our lives where less really is better. The last area of our lives that I think is really beneficial to simplify are our diets. Even without the insane grocery prices right now that we're all struggling with, but we won't talk about that.
Just go to Aldi.
I think that there's a huge benefit when you eliminate all of the processed food from your diet. And I think that we all know this, but when we make it a habit to eat whole foods, when we shop the outer section of the grocery store, and most importantly, I think when we cook our meals at home, not only do these things create more margin in our bank accounts, they make us healthier, and especially with the cooking aspect of it. Yes, cooking at home is cheaper, and more often than not, it's also healthier. But a huge aspect of cooking at home, at least when I was growing up and with my husband and kids now, is that when we cook dinner, we often are also in the kitchen together. And this means that we are interacting with each other, we're talking with each other, we're laughing and goofing around, and we're making these memories that will last. And so for all of these reasons and so many more that I could go into, I think it's worth taking a look at what we're eating and how we are preparing our food and all of the ways that simplifying those processes could benefit us. So ultimately, by simplifying our lives, what we're doing is we are taking a hard stand at what actually matters and what doesn't. And we are, as Greg McKeown says, ruthlessly eliminating the things that don't bring any kind of value to our lives. We are getting rid of the unnecessary, and we are creating margin, hopefully a lot of margin, for the meaningful. And by doing this, I've just found that I can read a book without feeling rushed. When I'm outside with my kids or hanging out with our chickens, I don't feel like there's an endless to-do list that I have to get caught up on. I can just sit right here and read a book and relax, and I can just be and not feel rushed. And I don't think a lot of us know what that feeling is because our lives are so complicated and busy and stressful, and we're so distracted. But when you put in the work to declutter these areas of your life, suddenly so many possibilities are there that you never even realized. So I encourage you to go through this process and see what awaits you on the other side of it. And I will leave you with one of my absolute favorite Bible verses that I think speaks to this a little bit, and it is 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 7. And it says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, with those we will be content." Now, I did promise you guys some book recommendations, so I'm gonna go through those. I will also have these linked down below that I highly recommend. They are especially helpful when you're doing a simplification of your entire life like we talked about today. So the first one that I'm gonna recommend is this book, Slow. This book is by Brooke McAlary, I think is how you say it. And this is a book about how she simplified and slowed down every aspect of her life so that she could live a more meaningful and intentional life. If you enjoyed this video, you will enjoy this book even more. I cannot recommend this one enough. The next one that I want to recommend, you may have heard of this. This is actually a pretty popular book in the world of minimalism, but this one is Good by Things by Fumio Sasaki, I think is how you say his name. But this is a book that explores minimalism from a Japanese perspective, and it is fascinating. I'm actually reading it again for the second time. Fumio also talks about how his life was before being a minimalist and how his life was after getting rid of everything that he didn't actually want or need, how freeing that was, and how it just changed his life. So this is a book that I cannot recommend enough. The last book I don't actually have a physical copy of. Again, if I wasn't on a no spend, I would probably buy it, but That is the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Or McEwen. I don't know how you say his last name. I'm sure that you've heard about this book. It is a wildly popular book and for very good reason, but Greg talks about how we can identify things that are actually meaningful to us and then gives us the steps to eliminate everything else so that we can live a more meaningful life. It is an excellent book. These two I actually found from my local library, so I would highly recommend that you look there as well. You can probably find Essentialism at your library as well. I would definitely look, but all three of these books have just been absolutely wonderful to read as somebody who loves simplifying and loves minimalism. So I highly recommend them. Thank you guys, as always, for being here. I hope that this video was an encouragement to you to start to look at these areas of your life and go all in on simplifying and slowing down so that you can get back more of your time. And with that time, you can live your life in a way that is more meaningful to you. Thank you guys for being here. I'll see you in the next one.